I'm really so grateful to be here along with our other board members to discuss our organization briefly with you all. Dr. Chunky Facio is our Secretary-Treasurer, Johnny Barba, our Medical Student Liaison, Dr. Robert Brodell, our Advisor, and Dr. Cody Eastup, our Resident Liaison. The RAD Society was a boots-on-the-ground, grassroots initiative aimed to connect faculty, community dermatologists, dermatology residents, medical students who represent the diversity of rural perspectives, experiences, and initiatives in our field. Our goal is to facilitate collaboration, brainstorming, research, planning, and the implementation of methods to improve rural access to high-quality dermatologic care for our patients. I wanted to personally share how special it is for me to be here to speak with you today. My passion to bring high-quality derm care to rural America, it stemmed from my humble beginnings in Central Illinois, and it blossomed during my journey from teaching on a Navajo Nation border town to becoming a derm resident at the University of New Mexico. But it wasn't until I was practicing in Minot, North Dakota, as my husband calls it, South Canada, when I became part of a sweet baby boy's journey that forever changed me as a physician and a mother. Wyatt's mom has given me permission to share his story, but before I had gotten to Minot, they had been without a dermatologist for over a decade. I think it was probably a few months into when I moved there, a baby boy was born in the nursery who had what's called a colloidal membrane. And it was something that none of the providers, none of the physicians in the nursery had seen before, and they had actually told mom that he wasn't going to make it through the newborn period. Thankfully, owing to a strong background that I have in peds dermatologist and experience with the condition, they did reach out to me since I had just started, and I was able to provide reassurance and education to the nursery physician and gave them the suspected diagnosis, prognosis, recommended treatment options. But unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to physically meet and introduce myself to the family. And understandably, they had fear, mistrust, doubt. They were just told that their baby boy wasn't going to survive. And now suddenly, some dermatologist they don't know is saying, no, everything's going to be okay. And the mom even joked, she said her first thought is, what does some middle of nowhere dermatologist know about what my baby's going through? Fair enough. So they did drive to Denver, and they were able to have the genetic testing that confirmed his diagnosis of lamellar ichthyosis. And then not long after they got back and finally met me and were established in my clinic, I met Wyatt, and it was the start to a very, very special journey, and we became very close. I immediately plugged them into the first Skin Foundation, and that was an incredible resource for them. And for me, to be honest, with these rare conditions, I learn as much from my patients as they learn from me. And the last meeting was actually in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is special to me because that's where I did my training, and all my experience with children with these different subtypes of ichthyosis occurred for my training. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend because of the birth of my second son. Not unfortunately, I was excited he was born. Unfortunately, because I really would have loved to attend, but I look forward to being at the next meeting. I'm available on speed dial to Wyatt anytime. If he ends up in an urgent care for any reason, it's not uncommon that nobody knows what to do. I've actually relocated to South Dakota, and they now have to drive 6 hours one way to maintain continuity of care with me. It's an honor, but it's also a really humbling reminder why the RADS was established. Patient advocacy organizations are of particular value to our rural patients because they are often one of few, if not the only person with a skin condition in some of our very remote communities and states. So it's a huge honor for me to represent our organization to you all, and I'd love to open up the discussion to learn how the RAD Society can support the CSD and how we can work together to achieve our overlapping missions and visions here today.
Yay, you should see them. The Society of Peds Derm is amazing. But, there's 9 states that don't have pedi derms. There's so many places that are really in poverty of having care. So, again, I applaud them what they're doing. Camp Discovery is another way to connect kids, so I've been involved with conference and, you know, they had never seen a derm, right? Like, so the patient advocacy organization is so important. So I'm so glad you're here sharing that you're available, and like all of your people should go on scientific advisory councils for some of these organizations, because I think all of your organizations want dedicated care. You doctors like these and dermatologists on your boards and scientific advisory councils. So anyway, I'd love to see it happen that way maybe, because I was the only derm that some of these people would see every year. So anyway, yeah, I'm glad you're here today.
We know that there are very specific ways we can increase access to care in rural America and in inner cities, for instance, where there's an access to care problem. And one thing is you can accept residents into dermatology from rural areas who are passionate about going back and serving, maybe in their hometown. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Cody Estep, who will just tell you 2 minutes of his story, so you can sense that this is not just an old person telling you that you can make a difference by doing this. You will understand when you hear the passion in his voice that this works.
University of Mississippi, and I am one of currently 3 dermatology bull track residents. So what that looks like, 3 months out of the year, I practice with Dr. Adam Bird, and he's in Louisville, not Louisville, Mississippi. And it's a very different way of training. I was talking to Dr. So, one of our grand round speakers, and he was like, how is this different? Why is it different? And you just don't have the resources that you would have at our main Jackson campus. And the way that you send people for infusions is different. The way advanced psoriasis is slightly different. But that being said, I'm from Eastern Kentucky, and that's why I came to Jackson for an await rotation as a 4th-year med student. I'd heard of Dr. Godell and Dr. Bird from Dr. Feldman at Wake Forest, and he knew where I wanted to be, what I wanted to do, 20 years from now. He said, well, I know a guy that you should go meet. So as a 4th year, I went down to Mississippi, and since then it's been a great experience down there. I feel like I'm getting great training to be able to go back to Eastern Kentucky and practice and provide good quality care, and hopefully recruit some other dermatologists to the area, because I feel like that's something I'm learning as well, is how to meet people and network and get what your vision is into actual pipeline and stuff.
Rural communities, as I kind of mentioned, our kiddos are so isolated, one, because they're rural, but now they have this really rare skin condition or a birthmark that just stands out. Being a teacher before medicine, I always talk with the family to make sure it makes sense, but I love to go to the schools and educate kids, or library story times about, the beautiful colors of our skin, the wonderful birthmarks we make, and talk about hair loss. I have some kiddos with alopecia, and they're very prone to being bullied in communities where they stand out because they're such small towns, and there are pros and cons to that, but our kids really need a lot of support. And I find that these patient advocacy organizations are also phenomenal, so the parents can kind of network and realize they're not alone. So I love Camp Discovery, love sending kids there. I had a dear friend and colleague who's a nurse practitioner who was able to volunteer with her son in Minnesota, and he's been going each year since. He's actually on a flyer this year, which is super cute. But in any case, she has tears just talking about the experience. Her son has severe eczema through Vixen, but it's so invaluable to bring families and patients together as they're figuring this out, figuring out, how their skin condition, is just part of who they are and how they're part of this world. So I'm really grateful to be here and love Camp Discovery and the badge scans, all this stuff, so we can get involved and plug our patients in.
And one more thing, it's not just Cody. I'd like you to meet Johnny Barba. Johnny Barba is a medical student. He's in the match to dermatology this year. Barba, B-A-R-B-A. Johnny?
Well, hello, and thank you, Dr. Riddell, for the whole introduction. It's hard to follow that one up. So I'm Johnny Barba. I'm a first-generation student from rural Ohio, Appalachia, and I just have to say, going into rural medicine, a lot of times people say why can't it be done? They start, we can't do this, can't do that, there's lack of resources. If you see medical students like myself who are inspired to go back to their hometowns, little small towns, tell them the reasons how it can happen. Connect them with Dr. Logue, connect them with Dr. Riddell, Dr. East, just connect them all together and really show them the reasons why you can do it. And really, I base it all on the statistics. If you really want some stats to take away from today, there's 40 times the concentration of dermatologists in urban versus rural areas. For every mile a patient travels through their dermatologist, Breslow's depth increases by 0.6%. For every 1% increase in poverty, Breslow's depth increases by 1%. So there's such a need for dermatological care in rural, underserved areas, and I could not be more blessed and honored and humbled to be a part of this team and just advancing care in these areas. Thank you all for your inspiration. Thank you for letting us come talk to you. And I always like to say, there's a great, big, beautiful today and tomorrow. Thank you for having us here.
Leo is an incredibly accomplished dermatologist. She has moved mountains and opened an incredibly successful private practice in New Mexico. There are so many barriers to opening up derm practice in that state, but it's a state with huge need, and she's found a place to provide care, and I'd love to introduce her and let her say a few words.
Yeah, it's very interesting for someone that grew up in Africa, found herself entrapped in New Mexico. It's the land of enchantment, but we call it the land of entrapment. So, New Mexico is a very poor state, and then we have less than 40 dermatologists serving a population that really require at least 90. So that's another problem. We're talking about rural access to medicine. And I'm glad you mentioned, you brought up the biggest frustration. From my end, the contribution is, our biggest frustration is retaining doctors, not just dermatologists. Primary cares are fleeing the states because, the malpractice in New Mexico is it's so bad. We have malpractice lawyers coming from Colorado, Texas, Arizona, coming to our state because they're allowed, there's no cap for the malpractice. So that's the biggest thing that's my biggest frustration. That's how I want to contribute to retain doctors. That's an access to care. Like, patients cannot have access to care, they don't have doctors to provide for them. So, being here, I'm really thankful again for this group, the fact that Mayor Beth embarked in this mission. And, I feel very fortunate because I want to have a voice, and if that's the way I can, help patients get access to care, I'm happy to be entrapped in Mexico.